Howdy folks, today we're going to be talking about the top 5 modifications that you can make to your Foxbody Mustang, but we're going to do this in a little bit of a different fashion. First, we're going to go back in time to the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s, and we're going to talk about the top 5 mods that were going on at that point in time. Then we're going to bring it forward to today's day and age and talk about the current day top 5 modifications that you could make to your car in the 2020s. Okay, let's start off by going back in time. Let's try to find some simpler times. The 90s, right? Gas was cheap. Headlight covers were cool. Nobody ever imagined getting a distracted driving ticket, right? Remember the days? Case Logic, 4-disc holder on your lap, steering with your knee, CD hanging out of your mouth, or tapes, right? Tapes were still cool. Something to think about, right? Now you drive down the road and God forbid you got to answer a call and you don't have Bluetooth. All hell breaks loose. Next thing you know, you got a massive ticket, or even worse, you get your car taken away from you. And all of this was going on at a time where minimum wage was next to nothing. Depending on what part of the country you lived in, $5 an hour was really big money. And I think this was one of the reasons that attracted so many of us to these cars, is you could pick these cars up for next to nothing, like $2,500 bucks, $3,000. I mean, if you're getting beyond that, you're getting a super low mile, super clean, maybe a one-owner car that never moved. And because they didn't cost a lot of money to buy, for very little money beyond that, you could create your own car that not only looked good, but performed decently for the time as well. Most of the cars that were being modified in and around the area that I grew up in were the GTs and the 2LX hardtop models. Not a lot of Verts, not a lot of Cobras, and I think the reason being was those two model cars had such a expensive price point to get into in the first place, right? Like this car here, its price tag new was like 21 and change. So $21,000 when you're a teenager or into your early 20s, if you would have had that much money laying around, you would have thought you were set for life. So, and those people buying those cars were not all that interested in modifying them, I don't think. Again, I'm not saying it didn't happen completely. They just wanted to buy the car, turn the key, and go. The reason I say all this is because the top 5 modifications that were occurring the most in the 90s were always being done from a very cost-conscious mindset. We didn't have a ton of money. We were barely making $5 an hour. The car cost enough, but you still wanted to soup it up, so you had to find a way to do it. So for example, rather than going through your 5.0 mag and ordering a Mac Pro Chamber H-pipe, maybe you'd go down to your local exhaust shop fella and you'd get him to cut the cats out of it and put some new 2¼ inch pipe in there. Or if you knew someone handy, you'd cut the cats open, beat the guts out of them, tack them back up, and then you could still pass inspections. Or a catback. I don't know what a catback was worth at the time, probably like 250 or 300 bucks. Rather than spend the money on the catback, you'd go buy a couple of mufflers for 30 bucks, 40 bucks, cut the stock ones out, put the new ones in, and head out there on a Friday night and make a little noise. So with all that out of the way, let's jump right into these. The top 5 modifications that you could have made to your Foxbody in the 90s. Coming in at number 1 is exhaust. I don't think there's anyone out there that would disagree with me on this. Exhaust was the first thing you did. If not the first day you got the car, your very first paycheck, you went and made that car louder. We all know how awesome they sound. Chevy guys agree, Mopar guys agree, everybody agrees. This small block Ford 5.0 HO power plant is one of the best sounding engines out there. So coming in at number 2 was I lowered my car. Now keeping with this budgetary mindset that I've been talking about, a lot of us cut our coils. You could have your car lowered in no time. You didn't have to wait for a set of springs to show up in the mail. And we definitely didn't have overnight shipping back then either. So you could go to your buddy's shop, or if you had one of your own, and pull your springs out, bust out the cutoff wheel, and have your car lowered in no time. I don't know who started the whole thing. I mean, it was definitely being done way before any of our times. It was an old hot rodders thing to do. So chances are somebody had their grandpa go, why don't you just whack a coil out of here? You'll drop your car in no time. And that word spread, and next thing you know, we're all doing it. And there was a little bit of science to it, if you will, how much of the coil and a half, is gonna correlate to how much you're lowering your car. And we all did it. Coming in at number 3 was stereo. You had to make some noise with your stereo, right? Some of the sub boxes that I've had in the back of that green coupe, I don't even want to admit it was the biggest, it was the baddest. I never ever paid anyone to install anything for me or build me a sub box. They were all homemade, and yeah, some of them were fairly embarrassing for sure. No cubic dimensions were taken into consideration. It was just big, bad, and did you make a lot of bass? And then in the cab, how clear could you make your door speakers and your dash speakers and your back parcel shelf speakers? Nobody goes out and buys aftermarket stereo equipment anymore, at least not that I'm aware of. And if you do, it's dirt cheap. It's not like when we were buying stereo equipment. I mean, a good head unit was well over $1,000. People were stealing them. This is why we all had alarms in our cars, because you didn't want to lose your stereo. God forbid you lost your Case Logic CD book. I mean, people had thousands and thousands of dollars tied up in those bloody things. Number 4, wheels and tires. Now I have a little bit of a difficult time calling number 4 wheels and tires because I had a lot of other mods going through my mind at the exact same time, i.e. go fast mods. But I also wanted to make my car look a little different than all the other Fox bodies that were running around. You got to remember, there was a ton of them on the road at this point in time. Sure, the SN cars had come out, but there was still a ton of Fox bodies. So you had the 10 holes, you had the turbines, you had the ponies. In my case, that's what I had on my coupe. And I didn't want to look like everybody else. So I bought a set of 17x9 Cobra R 4-bolt knockoffs to give me that little edge in and amongst the sea of other Fox bodies that were running around town. Number 5, you bought the Go Fast parts. If you were smart, you saved up, you bought yourself a set of gears. If you weren't smart like me, you bought all the gimmicky stuff. You got the underdrive pulleys, the K&N air filter, you removed your air silencer out of your air box, you did the 10-degree timing tune-up, all of these things to make yourself go a little bit quicker, when in all honesty, you should have just been saving your money, buy the gears, or get yourself a Cobra and upper lower intake, and then move down in a chronological way from there in order to incrementally make your car faster. So many of us blew money on things that you should have never blown money on. I bought a Hypertech chip and plugged it into that green car. I swore it was faster. In all honesty, it wasn't. I still remember when I got my car tuned after my heads cam and intake upgrade. I still had that chip in the car. Took it to this fella, Matthew Puzzi at Tech Motion that I've talked about before, to get it tuned, and he's like, "What the hell is this?" I'm like, "Don't even ask. I was a teenager and I spent a bunch of money on something that I shouldn't have." Saying all that, it's not to say that no one was doing HCI swaps or bolting blowers onto their cars. There most definitely was people that were doing that. However, they were people that had parents who had lots of money, or it was an older generation of individuals that could afford those modifications. My generation barely had 2 nickels to rub together. We could barely put gas in these cars, let alone modify them. So every dollar count. We had to do these modifications slowly, very calculated, and we had to do it on a budget. Moving on into the 2020s, some would say that much has changed. Others would argue that it has not at all. I tend to fall into the latter of those 2 categories and believe that the Fox body community, for the most part, is still very cost conscious. We like to see value for our dollars. However, as we've moved on in life, our economic output or our ability to spend money has increased. Maybe you've had a promotion at work. We're definitely not making minimum wage anymore. So therefore, the money that we're willing to spend on these cars and the upgrades that we're willing to do to them naturally get more expensive. One might assume that that would drastically change the modifications that we're making to these cars in the 2020s, and it sort of does. However, the modifications don't change all that much. We're pretty much still doing the exact same things. The top 5 modifications that I see going into the 2020s are as follows. Number 1, still king, exhaust. The only difference is now we've got the money to spend. So we get the headers we want, the H-pipe we want, the catback we want, or we go whole hog down to the custom exhaust shop and get the full kit done custom made, which isn't such a bad idea in all honesty. you're more than welcome to go check this video out. I had a real bad run-in on a bolt-on catback system for this convertible. All that being said, exhaust is still the #1 modification that you can do to these cars. Coming in at number 2 is suspension and handling, and wouldn't you know it, these mods are unfolding in the exact same fashion that they did in the 90s with me and my coupe. The only difference is I'm no longer cutting springs, at least not all the time. So now we're out shopping at Stifler's, Maxim Motorsports, Detroit Speed, hell, Roadster shops made a whole chassis for these cars. I've ridden in some of these cars that have full suspension on them, and let me tell you, it is nothing like riding in a stock Foxbody. These cars are sick. Number 3, and it's a bit of a 2-part modification, brakes, wheels, tires. The reason that I've broken it down this way is because one kind of comes with the other. You don't want to spend a bunch of unneeded money doing, say, a 4-lug rear disc swap, and then you realize you want to open up the universe of aftermarket wheels and you 5-lug swap it anyway. You might as well do it all at once. So guys are spending big money on brake kits, Bear brakes, Brembo brakes, whatever. And then they're spending even bigger money on one-off aftermarket 5-bolt wheels. This has turned into a big thing. People want wheels that nobody else has. And guys are willing to spend as much money as we used to spend buying 3 Foxbodies on one set of wheels. Coming in at number 4 is Go Fast parts. Now this is where you can see things start to change a little bit. Stereos are no longer as much of a thing anymore. I also think that people are more interested in driving their car, experiencing their car, hearing their car, and stereos just turned into a background noise. We're not so much interested in blowing the windows out of your car or listening to your license plate rattle. Now, the Go Fast category is massive. Coyote swaps, stroker motors, turbo cars, it just is endless. Now there's still a huge group of people in the Fox community that are interested in the old school heads, cam, and intake upgrades. They're some of my more popular videos in all honesty. I personally am still interested in the heads, cam, and intake swap stuff. So that is still very, very strong. This category is not a cheap category, even for these old budget build GT40 swaps. And a lot of that reason is because there's not that many of them laying around anymore. They're rare. Then you get into the Coyote swaps, 25 grand, stroker motors. Like, this stuff ain't cheap. And thank God we're all doing better in life, or I don't know how the hell we'd ever afford it. And finally, rounding this list out at number 5 is paint and body. Now the reason I brought paint and body into the fold is because these cars are not getting any younger. And finding a Fox that doesn't have some issues with its paint or body is getting harder and harder to find. Most of the cars that don't need any body work or any paint are locked up in garages somewhere. People are not letting them go. They're in their wills to their kids or their grandkids. And it's because paint and body is not cheap. It is grossly expensive. It's very, very hard to find a good, reputable shop that will do the type of quality work that you want. So paint and body needs to be a consideration these days. As a special bonus, I'm going to throw a 6th category at you, and it's got nothing to do with modifying cars. It's actually got everything to do with unmodifying cars. Now hear me out. There is a group of people within the Foxbody community that are going to absolutely obscene lengths to return these cars back to OE spec. Now, what I think is so cool about this is there is a younger generation of Foxbody fanatics that are coming up through the ranks that never had the same opportunity as you or I to go into their local Ford dealership and appreciate these cars in OE standard. And now, because of these people that are returning the cars to OE spec, this next generation can. If you like this video and you want to find out all the reasons why people are still buying Foxbody Mustangs, make sure you watch this video right here.